welcome back to CIA Declassified. Today we are going to step into the uncanny valley of espionage, a place where your own reflection might be your greatest enemy. The 1960s were the golden age of the deep cover operative, but the agency wanted more than just a spy in the room. They wanted to be the person in charge. To manipulate the Soviet high command, they conceived a plot so audacious it sounds like a Hollywood thriller. They didn't want to kill the enemy. They wanted to duplicate him. This was the inception of Operation Bingo. Operation Bingo was the pinnacle of what the agency called identity capture. The operation, detailed in files declassified in the late 20th century, involved the identification of a specific Soviet general whose physical dimensions and public habits made him a candidate for a replacement swap. A quote from the declassified operational plan. The success of Bingo relies on the total erasure of the double's original identity and the meticulous reconstruction of the target's mannerisms, speech patterns, and biological markers. End quote. The agency utilized top-tier plastic surgeons and makeup artists, some recruited from the same Studio 6 circles used in Project Argo, to perform biological sculpting on agency assets to match the target. A quote from a former CIA chief of disguise, Jonah Mendez. "We weren't just putting on a mask, we were creating a second skin that could withstand close-up scrutiny, sweat, and even physical contact." End quote. Historical records indicate that the Office of Technical Service actually experimented with early skin graft techniques to replicate unique birthmarks and scars of the Soviet targets. A quote from a 1964 internal CIA memo. "If the double cannot convince the general's wife in a dimly lit bedroom, the operation is a failure before it begins." End quote. The agency created a specialized mannerism laboratory where the double spent 16 hours a day watching surveillance footage to mimic the target's gait and muscle memory. A quote from the CIA's own declassified history of disguise. "The goal was total anonymity for the agent, allowing them to disappear into the skin of the enemy." End quote. The CIA developed specialized dental overlays to change the shape of the double's jawline and match the dental records of the Soviet general. To ensure absolute accuracy, the agency conducted forensic garment analysis, recreating the exact thread count and wear patterns of the general's favorite uniforms. A quote from a redacted OTS surgeon. "We are playing God with a scalpel. We are cutting away a man's history and sewing on a lie." End quote. It's kind of like that film Face Off. Have you seen that? I kind of like it. The operation required the double to learn to think in Russian, undergoing cognitive restructuring to ensure they wouldn't accidentally speak English in their sleep. The agency's script writers created hundreds of back pocket stories for the double to use if they were ever questioned about discrepancies in their memory. A quote from the director of Central Intelligence in 1965. "Operation Bingo represents the ultimate risk. If we are caught, we haven't just lost an agent, we've handed the Soviets a casus belli." End quote. Technical logs show the agency built a shadow apartment that was a perfect replica of the general's home, down to the brand of tea in the cupboard. Before the operation was suspended, the agency had already identified 3 potential donor identities, men who were physically identical to Soviet brass and had no living relatives. But even in the disclosure, the true scope of the swap is hidden. Certain documents, such as the ones titled Biological Integrity Audit, contain some of the highest concentrations of redactions in the Bingo file. Over 1,800 pages of DNA matching and post-op surveillance are completely redacted. This audit remains the most heavily censored chapter of Cold War medical espionage. Why is the agency still hiding the medical results of a 60-year-old abandoned operation? Get ready for the theory of the living double. Speculation suggests Operation Bingo was actually executed and never abandoned, and that several world leaders, even today in 2026, are actually agency puppets. This theory claims the redactions hide the DNA match results, alleging that the agency successfully replaced a high-ranking official, and that the lineage of that double still holds power today. What if he's still out there? A dark rumor suggests the original general was never killed, but is being kept in a glass cell in a Langley basement. This theory claims the redactions in the long-term containment section hide the cost of maintaining a living ghost for 6 decades to ensure the double's secret never dies. Some imagine the 1,800 redacted pages have to do with vital sign monitoring and logs that hide the fact that the double was actually a cyborg hybrid, and the CIA was testing early neural implants to control the general's behavior. Theorists looking at the blacked-out genetic sequencing files argue the agency discovered a biological marker for loyalty and used the general's DNA to create a fleet of submissive sleepers. Rumor says the psychological breakdown redactions hide evidence that the double eventually forgot they were a spy and tried to assassinate their CIA handlers to protect their new Soviet life. There's a theory on the dark web that Bingo 2 was a project that began this year in 2026 and is currently using deep fake skin to replace middle management diplomats with high-speed agency processors. Gossip around the surgical complications files suggests the agency disappeared the entire medical team after the surgery to ensure that the scar patterns could never be identified by a medical party. Speculation persists that the genealogy section is redacted because it contains proof that the agency literally murdered the past of the double, deleting all public records of their existence. Some believe the blacked-out frequency trigger logs prove the double had a remote kill switch implanted in their skull that could be activated via a specific radio signal. A fringe theory suggests the redacted pages detail a secret factory of doubles where the agency keeps spare faces for every major world leader, just in case. Rumor has it that the redactions in the dermal pigmentation logs hide the use of radioactive dyes that allowed the agency to track the double's location via satellite. And lastly, in the final section regarding asset retirement, some whisper that the double is currently living in a simulated Moscow inside a secret facility because they can no longer function in the real world. Was Operation Bingo a success? Tactically, it was a technical success. The agency proved they could create a perfect double that could bypass the most rigorous security. The breakthroughs in disguise and behavioral modeling were unprecedented. Strategically, it was a failure of nerve. The plan was never fully executed because the risk of geopolitical blowback was too high. However, the Bingo doctrine remains the foundation for modern identity theft operations in the world of high-stakes espionage. As far as technological and operational breakthroughs go, the two-faced general redefined the limits of human disguise, such as behavioral modeling, the birth of personality mapping to create perfect psychological doubles, advanced disguise kits, the development of semi-permanent prosthetics that can be worn for weeks without irritation, Vocal mimicry, early analog voice morphing technology used to fool radio and telephone security, and sanitization protocols, the identity erasure techniques used to hide assets after their missions are complete. Operation Bingo shows us that in the war for information, even your own face can be a weapon of mass deception. As the files reveal, the agency doesn't just watch you, sometimes they become you. Thanks for listening, and join us next time as we examine the truth drug, THC. In the early 1940s, the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA, experimented with a new way to break prisoners. They turned to a concentrated form of cannabis to loosen tongues. We'll uncover the Operation Bluebird precursors, the knockout drop manifest, and the moment the government realized that sometimes the best way to find the truth is to get the subject high. Join us next time for the high stakes of truth. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.